Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, as Chair Hashmi said, we're going to be skipping around on this docket and only doing the ones that are re-referred to finance, and then everything else is going to come on Thursday. And so for you in the crowd, we're going to be skipping around. There's going to be bills that we're not going to address, so just as a FYI, but we're going to start with Senate Bill 1031, right? And there's a substitute for that. And so I'll move that we adopt the substitute and then pass the mic, so to speak, to Senator Pekarsky. So I've moved the substitute.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the substitute. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The substitute has been adopted, is being distributed now. Senator Pekarsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to thank people who have reached out on this bill, who have shown up. And I also want to thank the countless people who have felt that they could not come out in public and share their stories about why they support this bill, but sent messages and emails and calls. This bill came out of my experience as a school board member when I learned that in the Commonwealth, it is legally allowable, if one chooses, to not educate a child. That was not a value statement as to whether or not parents are motivated by that or that is what is happening. It was simply an acknowledgement that in our laws, it is allowable, it is legal for somebody not to educate their child. And I since had victims come forward and share their stories where that is their reality. And unfortunately, through these conversations, what has been lost is the validity of their experiences. They have been ignored, they have been discounted, and I will, hopefully they have not been believed, but their stories are real, and our laws allow for what has happened to them to be legal. There is, I believe, a compelling state interest to ensure that every child in this Commonwealth is educated, and I know that many parents agree with that. I am a parent of 6. I obviously agree with that. But this is an issue that we cannot ignore. I regret that this issue has been politicized, and what has been lost in the conversation have been the stories of the victims and children. And a lot of assumptions have been made about my intentions to change homeschool rules. That was never the intention. I homeschooled my child. I think our laws are adequate, and I followed them. I've heard from many homeschool families that they follow them just fine, and they believe that all parents should follow them at the end of the day. But anyway, I think because this has been so politicized and the conversation has shifted from children to what is best for adults, we will take what I think is not a step back, but rather a step forward. So my substitute puts together a work study group. It's going to bring together homeschool parents, educators, folks from HEAV, parents whose children are homeschooled or under the religious exemption, students who were educated through religious exemption and now are adults. They're going to bring all of these folks together. They're going to look into what the compulsory school attendance requirements are throughout the United States and how Virginia compares to those. And then they're going to hopefully give us a recommendation as to whether or not we need to do anything differently with our compulsory and attendance requirements and our religious exemption. So we will leave it into the very capable hands. It's going to bring in all the stakeholders so your voices can be heard, and we will take it from there. So I think that was a long-winded way of saying I hope this is a step forward that people will be able to support.
Thank you, Senator Pekarsky. And because we already had public testimony on this legislation, all legislation actually that we're going to be hearing today, there is no public testimony today. But I will open the floor to any committee members who wish to make a comment or ask a question. And I see Senator Head on the board. Senator Head.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just comment on the bill. I appreciate where the patron is trying to go on this and the best of intentions on that, but just to give an alternative perspective is, I think that it is, we obviously have a requirement as constitutionally to provide an education, or at least an educational opportunity to all of our children, and to make sure that we have an educated society. But the bottom line for me on this, even if it's a work group, is that the responsibility of raising children and educating children really rests with the parents, period, full stop. And so I'm going to be voting no today, and I really do appreciate where this is going, but I don't think this is something we need to do, because candidly, we got kids that show up in school that also can't read, and they're in schools, and it's a real problem. So just, that's my perspective on that, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Head. And if all speakers will just share with us if you are speaking to the bill or if you have a question for the patron, that would be helpful. Senator Lucas.
Yes, Madam Chair, I only have a question because in the event that this bill passes, I understand there are going to be 11 members of the board. Is that correct? It's
Yes,
11 members of the board. Okay.
correct, yep.
Okay, and because I'm not sure what this substitute does, I think I might ask that this bill go to finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The request is that we will re-refer it to Finance. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Durant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the patron and then speaking to the bill.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So I guess my question now that looking at this convening a work group, what is the makeup of what that work group would look like? I know just one of our colleagues just alluded to it, but is there, you mentioned stakeholders, and how would that be comprised and how would they be selected? I assume stakeholders would mean including members of the homeschooling community. Is that?
Senator, if you would take a look at the substitute in front of you.
Yeah,
It is
yeah. I
defined
guess I
in
just
there,
wanna
but
kinda
I will let Senator Pekarsky respond to your question.
Madam Chair, Julia wants to quickly go over it.
Madam Chair, the substitute in front of you includes one less required membership than the substitute on LIS. This was printed a little earlier than the final substitute was posted. I'm going to read directly from the substitute that's posted on LIS. It provides that the work group shall consist of 2 representatives of local school boards to be selected by the Speaker of House of Delegates, 2 representatives of public school teachers to be selected by the Senate Committee on Rules, 2 parents who provide home instruction to their children under the relevant section of the code, 1 each of whom shall be selected by the the Speaker of the House and the Senate Committee on Rules. 2 parents of children who are exempt from compulsory attendance pursuant to the religious exemption in the code, selected the same way. 2 adults who, as children, were exempt from compulsory attendance requirements pursuant to that religious exemption in the code, selected the same way. 1 representative from the Home Education Association of Virginia, and 1 representative from the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. And that is the total membership of the work group.
Thank you. Thank you. Does
Madam
that
Chair.
answer your
Yep.
question, Senator
It
Durant?
does. I'd just like to speak to this. And I appreciate the willingness by the patron to work toward, I guess, the spirit of what the patron is looking to accomplish. But as a former homeschooling parent myself, I've got a lot of concerns about what I think the work group might, what could come out of it. And I agree a lot with what my colleague Senator Head said, that we have challenges in outcomes in all settings, including in the public setting, and it really, speaks to the heart of who are the primary and the first educators, and it is we, the parents. And so I will not be able to support it, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Durant. I see Senator Peak and followed by Senator Pekarsky.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm to speak to the bill, which is now a work study, and I'll be voting against this. It just seems to me, and I don't believe the patron intended it this way. I believe the patron saw what she describes as a loophole, but when you see the involvement that we have gotten from the Commonwealth about the religious exemption, and this just feels like it is targeted at our Christian or other religions that are focused on educating their children the way that they see is the best way to educate their children. And I'm afraid that this work study, again, will be focused on our hardworking citizens who are focused on educating their children with the religious, moral, ethical values that they believe in and that they want their children to have. And I just don't want to be a part of a work study that is going to specifically target people who are claiming a religious exemption.
Thank you, Senator Peak. Senator Pekarsky, do you want to wait until a conclusion of comments? We have
Sure,
two
yeah,
more. Next, we'll hear from Senator Craig, followed by Senator Favola.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to thank the senator for really taking this bill by a couple days to work on this, to make it better. But unfortunately, all of my grandchildren are homeschooled. One uses a religious exemption, and these children are flourishing. They are taking field trips. They are very active in the educational process, and for those reasons, I'm going to have to vote no on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just make two comments. I mean, this is not an anti-religious exemption bill. This is a bill that is bringing stakeholders together to see if we can learn, perhaps about best practices, to see if we can learn about how to ensure that our children really do get the education that our parents want them to receive and that we as a society want to receive. And I think that's just an important point. And there is also a requirement that a report should be produced, which will have recommendations, and that will come before the respective authorizing committees. So this is a healthy conversation, and I'm hoping that people can come to the table with goodwill and willing to listen to each other. So having said that, Madam Chair, I am going to support this bill.
Thank you, Senator Favola. Seeing no other members from the committee on the board, I will ask Senator Pekarsky to make final comments, and then we will move to a vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, I have to address some of the things that were said. Unfortunately, this right here is not a conversation about public schools. We talk about public schools and the ways in which we can make them better because we know that there are children who are falling through the cracks. We have bills, lots and lots of bills on that, and I sit in a committee where we spend almost all of our time talking about how to make public schools better. This bill does not target Christians. I am a Christian. I don't even know where or why that would even come to this discussion. So let me just say that right now. I mean, it's just nonsensical that I would target myself. This bill is not about the many homeschoolers who have very positive outcomes, whose parents are doing a great job. It is about, again, the victims. There are victims that people heard in committee. So by not supporting this bill, it is a very targeted decision to ignore that there are children who are not flourishing, and even worse, we have been told, have been neglected or abused. These are not my words. These are the stories of the victims. And if there's anything we can do as a state, we must do it in the same way that we step in when there is abuse and neglect in homes that have nothing to do under this religious exemption. I would ask that people focus themselves on the victims. That's what this bill is about. And if you are a successful homeschooler, first of all, this doesn't touch homeschooling at all. If you're successful in religious exemption, and I'm sure most people are, I do not see why this would bother you in any way. This is a conversation. We have to be able to have conversations even when they're hard.
Thank you, Senator Prakarsky. Just a reminder for our committee members, I'm going to be asking for a motion on the substitute, which is to establish the work group, and a work group that will be convened and then move forward in the conversations and then bringing a recommendation forward. That is the motion, and it will be re-referred to committee. So if someone can make that motion, that would be great.
Second.
We have a motion to report and re-refer to Senate Finance. Clerk, please open the roll.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Thank you. The bill is reported and re-referred to Senate Finance. And we welcome everyone to remain here for the remainder of the discussion on the other legislation. However, if you are exiting, we ask that you do it quietly so that the committee can continue the work. I'm going to turn the chair back over to Senator Van Valkenburg.